The best part of the divorce was seeing Lori's face when she was handed the divorce complaint right at the airport. I didn't skimp and hired two people, one to serve the subpoena and the other to film it. Heck, I could hire three. I used Lori's card to pay. She allowed me to have my own card in one of her accounts when she signed up for it, while getting the very job that ruined us. When she moved out, she forgot to cancel my card. I don't think she even remembered the account even existed. She was careless about such things. And then all the banks in the city easily issued her credit cards. It was easy to lose count of the cards she had. The card cash withdrawal feature was great, especially the convenience of checks that she never destroyed when they came in the mail. She had some kind of gold or platinum level with a credit limit, and the cash withdrawal limit was equally generous. I withdrew $15,000 and put it into a joint account I had with my sister. I signed my name on the checks. Nobody asked a single question. It's possible Lori could try to get the money back, but it was all part of the common marital property, as my lawyer said, so maybe not. Perhaps she could have complained to the police. Don't know. She never did this. In the end, everything worked out fine. I used the money for a good cause. She earned more than me. Much more. It's funny, but it was this episode that first came to mind when I saw her again after almost 5 years. Don't get me wrong. I used the cash loan for a different purpose than my regular Lori credit card, which had a hefty limit. With the credit card, I decided that if I had to start my life over from scratch because my wife had turned into a lying, cheating bitch, then I would do it in style. So I went shopping. I bought new clothes, new luggage, and arranged fancy dinners. In addition, I was tested for sexually transmitted diseases. Even with limited sexual activity in recent months, I didn't want to take any chances. You could say I didn't spend a penny of my own money in the 2 weeks we were apart before I left. Luckily, my divorce lawyer accepted credit cards, so I generously paid him in advance on my soon-to-be ex-wife's credit card, including the service fee. The credit card fraud control center called a couple of times, but they only called my home number, and I kept saying everything was fine. I knew all the answers to her security questions, and I could imitate her voice in a decent falsetto. Perhaps she could squeeze me for this too. But no one did. And here she is now, heading towards my table on the veranda as if she owned the place, her wavy blonde hair flowing over her shoulders in a gentle breeze, her generous breasts thrust forward, and her hips, made for childbearing, swaying like a hypnotist's pendulum as she slowly comes closer. She was just wearing jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt, but life around us stopped, as it usually does, when she appeared and everyone stared. Men or women, it doesn't matter. That's how it was in the old days. Now it was all the more obvious. I assumed that there was a possibility that this moment would come, although I hoped that she had already let go of everything and would not come, but obviously not. The day before I ran into one of her friends at the store. Lori knew I loved this cafe. I'm a creature of habit in terms of when I do things and where I go. It was a logical place to find me if that's what she wanted. And a friend I met the day before said that's exactly what Lori wanted. "Hello, dear husband," she said. "Lori," I answered, nodding. I added, "Have you recovered?" She rocked on her heels as if I had hit her. She did gain a couple of pounds, but they were well distributed. However, I had never asked her questions like this before, nor had I ever implied that she was anything less than perfect. Never. I knew I was being cruel because I understood her vulnerabilities better than most people. I just didn't want her to have any false hopes. "You don't have to be such an asshole, Steve." This is not what a husband says to his wife. It's husband again. Against my will, I laughed. An unexpected approach. In retrospect, this makes what happened at the airport much more understandable. Conclusion: you should have listened to your lawyer. He really spoke the truth. At the time, I thought he was full of crap. She can't be that stupid, I thought, based on the 5 years I've known her. Apparently, I was wrong. Life is full of surprises. Which brings me back to the look on her face when she was handed a divorce summons in the airport departure lounge 5 years ago. This look. At first, it was a twisted mask of rage. Then her face contorted into tears turned into a sob, and she fell, curled up in a fetal position on the floor of the terminal. Okay, call me a jerk, but my sadistic pleasure in that moment was the beginning of my return to masculinity. This was my Doolittle raid of the Pacific Egg campaign after it wrecked my emotional Pearl Harbor. I think I played that video about 20 times the day I received it, giggling until I felt sad. Then I drank bourbon until I was completely drunk, and when I finally woke up the next day, I was practically praying to die from the hammer in my head. At the airport, when she was given a summons, everyone around began to film her hysterics, of course, because of the novelty. When they realized who she was, even more people began to capture the moment as a memory. The video appeared on social networks within minutes. I never had to pay a second guy to film it. That's it. Forget about the fun holidays in Europe, bitch, I thought then. Husband? I finally said, looking into her bright blue eyes. Everyone around pretended not to eavesdrop. Husband, she nodded. I just looked at her. She crossed her arms over her chest. I told you that I would never let you divorce me. That's why I tore up everything that the bailiffs brought me. As she said this, I felt her tap her toes on the ground, usually with the right foot. This was her long-standing nervous habit. Nature has already puffed out her chest. I couldn't say anything. She had her alternative facts, and she was going to stick to them. You see, the second bailiff's video showed that after Lori was lifted off the floor by several movers who took the opportunity to randomly grope her breasts and butt while lifting her, she tore the divorce complaint envelope into 4 pieces and threw them away into the nearest trash can. She did the same with every document my lawyer served her after that during the trial. Requests for discovery to which she never responded, notices of her interrogation for which she failed to appear, notices of interrogations witnesses to the infidelity, with notices of interviews with other participants in the infidelity, with notice of the hearing, and with the final decree of divorce. As far as I know, she never hired a lawyer. She never appeared in court. She did not respond to any document we submitted. Instead, she said the same thing every time the bailiffs found her. I will never agree to a divorce. The same 2 guys insisted on serving her documents after the first summons. They enjoyed the drama, even if she wasn't throwing tantrums anymore. She didn't even try to run away or hide. They never had any problems finding out where she was. Lori just felt like if she didn't want to agree to the divorce, it wouldn't happen. That's what my lawyer told me was going on in her head. When he said this after serving her the summons, I paid him another hefty advance for his services from my wife's card. I thought she was doing something dramatic at the last minute to stop us. No. I also thought she would at least dispute the credit card charges, and I was wrong about this too. My sister turned out to be right. I hope this girl is good in bed, little brother. My sister told me a few okay, probably 5 beers after I told her I was getting married, because I truly believe, she added, with a particularly emphasized emphasis on the verb, that she is dumber than a bag of hammers. At that time, her words offended me. Of course, I knew that Lori was not the best student, but she had a big heart that she opened to me. Just like your legs. We were each other's first. We were freshmen in college. We were both stupid. We both made a big mistake. After one missed period, several weeks of waiting, purchasing a home test, and visiting the doctor, I took charge and proposed. Both families were terrified. First, because I took her to bed. Then because she allowed me. And finally, because we were going to get married in our first year of college. Then I defended her when everyone else criticized her. This made our love stronger. I was her knight in shining armor. Neither of us wanted a child, but it turned out that we wanted even less the miscarriage that eventually happened. About 10–20% of known pregnancies end in miscarriage, but this figure is likely higher if we include those that occur very early, before the woman even knows she is pregnant. By the time Lori miscarried, we had already married in a quiet civil ceremony, sacrifices to the wisdom of youth. Lesson learned. It's always worth waiting a couple of months if you can to see if the problem resolves itself. Getting married during Christmas break our freshman year changed the dynamic of college life for both of us. We rented an apartment, went to classes, and naturally did not meet others. We still talked to our friends, but they didn't quite know how to deal with us as a married couple. As a result, we spent a lot of time with each other. At first, we were preparing for the birth of a child. Then they dealt with the loss. And finally, when this crisis passed, we indulged in sex like rabbits because, well, we were married. Lori started taking birth control pills because she no longer had anything to hide. Of course, there were problems. Lori dropped out after her second year. She was depressed. I tried to console her, thinking that these were unresolved issues related to the miscarriage the year before. Now I think the reason was that she finally realized that she was not interested in studying and came to terms with it. Whatever it was, she dealt with it and began working in various sales positions. She did well. It turned out that men love to buy things from beautiful young women who smile at them with their perfect white teeth, highlighting their generous breasts under those smiles. And I started taking more classes to try to graduate early. I started working in an office during the summer, which eventually led to a full-time job after graduation at a management consulting company. The funny thing was that Lori never considered herself beautiful. In high school, she was fat, had acne, had glasses and braces, and was short. Just before college, she had one last growth spurt that redistributed her weight into her ideal figure. Her acne went away, her braces came off, and she wore contact lenses instead of glasses. But she still considered herself fat and ugly, and spent the first months of college living in her withdrawn shell. We met at a party. She was flirting with a guy trying to come out of her shell for the first time when his drunk girlfriend pushed her aside, calling her fat and a disgusting, ugly girl. Lori and this girl knew each other in high school and were not friends. Lori was in tears when I literally bumped into her sitting on the stairs. She cried because she believed the girl's evil words, despite all the evidence to the contrary. After I got to my feet and brushed off her apologies for being so fat and getting in the way, I calmed her down, took her out for coffee, listened to her sad story about how disgusting she was, and tried my best not to drool. She realized that I had stopped listening to her and just stared into her eyes. She became embarrassed, closed in on herself, crossed her arms, and asked what was wrong. I wasn't usually so straightforward. I didn't have any regular girlfriends, although things were going well in terms of casual touching. I was a crammer. I didn't have the gift of gab. But I just looked at her and said that she is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life. She just watched, waiting for something to happen. When she thought I was being sincere, she started crying again and didn't stop until I took her outside, found a bench, and hugged her tightly. Somehow the hug turned into a kiss of such passionate intensity that the paint should have melted at a distance of 100 yards. After that, she almost never left my side, until she left. When the fog of memory cleared, Lori sat at my table uninvited. The waiter appeared like a shark rushing to the feeding area. Lori ordered Cosmopolitan. She was probably rewatching Sex and the City. Separate checks, I told the waiter. He looked at me like I was crazy and went to get her drink. Lori pouted. Do you want to treat the girl? The girl I like, of course. She pouted even more. The waiter returned with her cocktail in less than 2 minutes. This was a record for the establishment. Lori had such an effect on people. Everyone except me. I forgave you, you know, she said, looking into my eyes. I waited, but she didn't say anything more. That's good, I finally said. Containing rage leads to heart disease. Conducted research. I know, she said. I couldn't resist. And why did you forgive me? She looked at me in surprise. Apparently, she imagined a completely different conversation. For leaving me and our marriage, of course. For writing those nasty things on social networks. For trying to divorce me. For what he did to the house. But as I said, I have forgiven you. I'm ready to take you back so we can move on with our lives and grow old together, just like we planned when you were my knight in shining armor when we first met. She smiled, expecting me to accept her favor. I smiled back, watching as hope lit up in her eyes. No, thank you, I passed. The hope in her eyes went out like the flame of a blown-out candle. I saw her face begin to contort, ready to release her tears. Leave it, I said. Tears won't help. She immediately stopped her attempt to cry. I wonder what will happen next. Her eyes began to dart around. I've been with her long enough to know what that means. So, I see there will be a story, right? Which one this time? I asked. She sat down, drooping, refusing this option as well. If I guessed correctly, she was probably going to be straight with me. Just like when we met almost 10 years ago. Refreshing, but years overdue. You never gave me a chance to explain myself, she said after a pause. Well, here it is, I thought. I need alcohol, and urgently. I wanted to enjoy the Bordeaux in the glass in front of me. I'm not a wine connoisseur, but I love the taste of good wine. I started drinking them after our breakup, when I was finding my feet again. Good wine takes me back to the beginning of hope. This red was above average, but not surprising since this place is now associated with local wineries and importers. Once upon a time, only coffee was served here. Back then, none of us could afford such wine, even if it were available. Now, half a decade later, everything was different. I wanted to take some time to enjoy it. I ordered it to drink after my espresso because why not? And like I said, they started with coffee, so it was great, but I felt like I'd have to knock back the cheap wine to last the next 15 minutes. And so, I hoped that she couldn't get to me. I realized that I needed help. I took the phone and wrote a message. The enemy has taken aim. We need a wingman urgently. Before I could send the message, the answer came. I'm driving with the do not disturb while driving function. I'll see your message when I get where I'm going. Okay, you'll have to fight alone. I stared at Lori, reaching for my glass of wine. He drained it in one gulp. Nonsense, I said. She shuddered in her chair and then leaned back. I've never raised my voice to her before, but the time has come. We need to live separately. Can't you see that this marriage has problems? I almost shouted, imitating her voice quite well, keeping the intonation and tone, giving it just a little drama, but certainly adding an expression of insane intensity, which was only a little less than what she was portraying then. Some of the people at other tables, those who were pretending not to listen to us, began to laugh. They seemed to agree. They knew her voice. The whole city knew. I just need time for myself, to find yourself. I'm losing my identity. I don't know who I am anymore. I continued to quote her in a shrill voice, but now at level 11 on the scale. We were just children when we got married. Damn it, I'm still just a kid myself. I can't even think about having children if I'm still a child myself. I continued, adding dramatic arm swings that led to a pose where the arms were extended straight, parallel to the floor, depicting Lori nailed to the cross of motherhood. And the finale. I'm afraid of missing out on something important. And then the best part, Lori, I want to eat the brains out of life, dear, sweet hubby. And I'm quoting this line from the movie Dead Poets Society, which you like even though they stole it from Thoreau, to distract you from what I really want to do, which is fuck the guy who hosts the sports segment really hard before how I handle the weather. And fuck his wife, I shouted. Lori looked at me in shock. The guests at the neighboring tables tried their best to pretend that they were not listening to us. This whole dirty story once became international news, largely thanks to me. Everyone probably knew the story, but I doubt anyone remembered it after a week or so. People today have memories like moths, but it all came up again now. To be fair, she never said the last thing I quoted. Well, almost none of it. She talked about her fear of missing out. She also talked about sucking the brains out of life, which almost made me laugh at the time due to how overly dramatic it was. And I found out about the sports guy and his wife only after our quarrel. What stopped me from laughing then, when she mentioned brain sucking, was that immediately after a short pause, she added, "If you love me, you will let me do it." I didn't even think about the words I said then. They broke out of their own accord, like hounds from hell, released to drag sinful souls back into the abyss of eternal despair. I couldn't stop them, even if I tried. Well, apparently I don't love you, I said, and immediately ran up the stairs to the bedroom and began emptying the drawers of her clothes, throwing them over the railing onto the living room floor below. This brought tears to her eyes, But by then I had already gone downstairs, grabbed some plastic trash bags, and started packing her clothes into them. I no longer had the desire to fight her. Before I took the bags, she was trying to gather some clothes, apparently to take them back upstairs, but she gave up and switched to plan B when she saw the bags. I think she imagined that I would be the one to leave. I left eventually, but on my terms, not hers. Meanwhile, I was so angry that I had to run 10 miles to avoid hitting someone or something. Yes, we are certainly stuck in a rut. The cold started a few months before she got her new job. I started spending more time at my job after graduation, and Lori had just quit one of her sales jobs because her boss started harassing her. She was hanging around the house, trying to figure out what to do next, when a friend invited her to the beach in the Gulf of Mexico in Florida. She was driving me crazy, so I told her to go. The trip was a failure in terms of enjoyment. The weather was terrible. The hurricane was unexpectedly heading towards the beach, but then fell apart. In general, everything was rainy and dull. By pure chance, while Lori was sunbathing on the beach on the one nice day before she had to leave, wearing a not-so-conservative bikini, she was accidentally spotted by a local news crew from our town. They went there to cover the hurricane, but were forced to settle for reporting on the waterspout they saw that morning. They were looking for witnesses to interview. Lori couldn't see anything, but she looked great in a bikini, so they decided to talk to her. In a moment of comic improv that I didn't even know was possible, Lori gave a 2-minute fake weather report about how the weather had been terrible for the past 4 days, resulting in a 90% chance of everyone going to bed early, all presented as a report from the local weather forecaster, just in front of the ocean. It turned out to be a hit. In the following days, there was a surge in demand for a sexy weather girl. She was hired until the end of the month. Of course, there were complaints online that she was being objectified. The station got around this, as well as the fact that she had no meteorology background, by calling her a weather reporter and ensuring she dressed modestly on air. But her body and face spoke for themselves. When Lori got the job, she jumped for joy. She was so excited. Her breasts bounced with a slight delay compared to the rest of her body. But I was sincerely happy for her too. Little did I know. At first, everything was fine. With the extra money she started making, we paid off the balance of my student loans and rented a nice house. Sex life has also improved after some decline. But then everything went wrong. She began to spend more time at work. She has fans. She opened a Twitter account where she posted many selfies. He was very popular. Finally, she began to think of herself not just as beautiful, but as a stunning beauty. She really was like that, and I had no problem with it. But she has an ambition. This has already become a problem. She started making sarcastic remarks about me. She began to speak disparagingly about me and ridiculed me in front of her colleagues. We would go to her work events, and she would openly flirt. She did not tolerate criticism on this matter. On screen, her clothes were modest, but I noticed that we and more often she alone appeared in public places in provocative outfits. Her sex life, which had fallen into disrepair when she was moping, revived for a short time, then faded away again and became even rarer than before. The same thing happened with ordinary intimacy time together, physical intimacy. I saw where this was going, but she brushed me off when I tried to say something. She said that I was jealous of her success. When she dropped the bombshell that she wanted to live separately, it didn't come as a complete surprise. I assumed that she had been dating someone for a long time, and therefore, in response to her proposal, I threw out all the anger that had accumulated during this time. I never dated Deshawn while we lived together, she finally said in the cafe. I was surprised. There was nuance to this lie. It depended on what was meant by together. Did you just live together, or were you married? Looks like she learned something from television after all. Shaun White was a former wide receiver for the local professional football team. He had a stellar college career and a budding pro career until the team owner decided he had to leave. There were rumors that a woman was the cause of the controversy. Evil tongues said that this woman was the owner's wife, or his daughter. Depends on who you talk to. Maybe it was both because Dishon was handsome and charismatic. His wife was a beautiful Asian swimsuit model who had to leave because she was approaching 30. Dishon loved hearing his voice. It was not difficult to persuade him to leave football for a media career. He fit in nicely on the local news next to Lori. His segment was before hers. Strictly speaking, Lori wasn't lying. She didn't actually date Dishon while we were together in the shared house sense. She waited until I kicked her out of the house, and only then slept with him when we were only legally together as husband and wife. But with Sean's wife, it was different. She and Lori had been busy for about 2 weeks before Lori told me she needed space. Dishon and his wife seemed to enjoy threesomes. They worked as a team to get them settled. Typically, Dishon's wife would lure the girl closer, and then Dashon would catch them together, first watching and then coaxing her into letting him join. They first took the standard approach with Lori and kept her interested up to a point. They managed to convince her that it wasn't cheating if she had sex with a girl, but Lori resisted doing anything more with Dishon himself. Changing tactics, they began to work on her frustrations and complexes. She seemed to have a lot more of them than I knew, which speaks volumes about the health of our relationship. In addition to worrying that she was losing her identity while married, she also feared that she was missing out on the opportunity to learn what it was like to have sex with other men. And women, I was her only lover, and now that she was spending all day with a bunch of beautiful people, she began to wonder. They managed to instill in her the idea that sex that happens while you're separated doesn't count, especially if it happens during a vacation trip to Europe, which is the rule for trips to Las Vegas. She could go with them for a couple of weeks and let herself go crazy where no one knew her. This, they said, would make our marriage stronger in the long run when we got back together. After I kicked her out, her views on cheating changed quite quickly. Lori moved in with the Dishon family and began eating the brains out of life and Dishon that same night. Unfortunately for her future plans, Dishon wasn't too restrained. The day after they started hooking up, Dishon told friends at the station that he was already bringing a blizzard to the mountains of a sexy weather girl. These friends told other friends. Then a staff member at the station who disapproved of sex outside of marriage, especially cheating, especially if it involved black guys and white women, kindly told me about it anonymously. That's when I hired a lawyer. The advance I gave him was more than enough to hire a private detective, but the money wasn't really needed. Lori had only left home 3 days ago, and neither she nor the Dishon family had even tried to hide. Detectives obtained numerous photographs of the three of them outdoors, kissing with tongues and with their hands in each other's pants. There were photos of all three of them kissing each other, and then in various combinations of one-on-one and two-on-one, with and without clothes. My lawyer kindly provided copies of the divorce complaint, including photographic evidence, to his media contacts. I helped light the fire. I updated my Facebook status to single and changed my profile photo to a picture of Lori kissing Dishon, her hand on his fly. I wanted it to be decent enough for maximum distribution. I posted it on Twitter and tagged her. I wrote, "When the pastor said, 'Deny everyone else,' she heard, 'Please everyone else.'" The story spread like a napalm flash, but like any flash of such intensity, it quickly burned out and everyone forgot about it as the divorce case wound its way through the courts. Despite the fact that Lori tore up all the documents handed to her, the matter moved forward. My lawyer had to do all the extra work to prove our case because Lori was not cooperating. It wasn't difficult, but her refusal to cooperate kept delaying things. Lori, of course, blamed me for what happened. My aggressive response to her request for a marriage on pause came as a complete surprise to her. Apparently, she thought that we could meet when she had free time. This would be my opportunity to woo her and make her fall in love with me again when she is not busy having sex with someone else. The problem was my foolishness in not allowing her to find me. I learned this after Dashon and his wife were questioned in their divorce proceedings. Lori poured her heart out to them after Dashon finally emptied himself in and on Lori, and they gladly told the lawyer and the court reporter all about it. The Dishons were unhappy that he was fired, that is, excuse me, offered to consider career opportunities, perhaps somewhere else. Pending this consideration, he was placed on leave at his own expense, while the blonde with huge breasts, a flat tummy, and a round, firm ass that looked stunning in a sexy pose, she kept her job. Of course, this does not mean that the station left him penniless. The leave at your own expense status was a tactic for negotiating dismissal. Dishon got paid well. Very good ones, to be honest, especially after his lawyers started threatening to sue for unfair dismissal. The fact is that Dishon and Lori broke the law. Yes, the station had a no fraternization policy, and that was the legal basis for their response. But that is not the law that was broken. The law was that the public images of television personalities belonged to the station, and this scandal became a marketing problem, especially with the crazy husband, that is, me, and his lawyer making a big fuss about it. The station needed good news about visits to sick orphans in hospitals or cute girls who build huge domino shows. What they didn't need at all, not even in the slightest, were stories about scandals that upset the old people watching their show and buying what was advertised on it. Sad or angry news was reserved for national news programs. So the station wanted to fire Lori too, to be fair, but after the vulgar interest in the circumstances of the scandal died down, Lori's support group on Twitter made waves about the shameful attacks on her and the patriarchy and harassment women face at work every day from men in power. There were also numerous comments, I was told, that the only real surprise was that she was with a loser like me in the first place. Oh yeah, and she was pregnant too. I found out about it later, but the station found out about it quite soon after it happened. So the station folded like wet toast and sent her on paid maternity leave, without advertising it for privacy reasons. After all, she had already suffered a miscarriage in college. Then, after the baby was born, they gave her a morning news talk show where she could chat about whatever was on her mind, and lately she had been talking a lot about breastfeeding. When she talked about dieting to get back to her pre-pregnancy weight, she would occasionally wear a bikini. Bonus for advertisers, okay? Now I admit that I am treating her unfairly. She turned out to be a very pleasant interviewer. It's not like I was specifically following her, but a couple of times my friends were watching, and I watched to seem polite and pretend I didn't care. As Lori became more confident over the course of our marriage, confidence that increased tenfold when she started working in television, she became very good at putting people at ease and finding things to talk about. And she wasn't afraid to let her latent sense of humor, the same one that helped her get the job, come out to full effect. I saw brief hints of this while we were married, but Lori apparently decided that she needed to act more seriously around me. A missed opportunity. In a moment of self-reflection, when I allowed myself to do so, it was obvious that we really did get married too early, just like everyone said, and our marriage prevented us from developing as individuals. We were supposed to remain in each other's memory as our first love, and that was all. But who wants to admit this? But we were married, and they took vows, and if you can't keep your promises, then who and what are you then? What can you offer the world if your word is not binding? If she wanted to play, we should have just talked and ended the marriage. There would be screaming and tears, but it would be more honest. I guess none of us wanted to admit that we had made a mistake, and yet we both got it. At least I do. I have no idea what she was thinking, pretending that she tore up all the divorce papers and we were still married, especially when she continued to spread her wings or legs since I left. Yes, people still kept me in the loop, even though I made it clear that I didn't want to. My guess is that she wanted to stay in the marriage because of the security it offered. She didn't explain everything she was thinking to the Dishons because she stopped talking to them after she was given the summons at the airport. When he saw the airport scene on social media as he and his wife approached security, Dishon immediately canceled his trip to Europe. It wasn't that they couldn't enjoy the trip. Instead, Dishon and his wife immediately realized the public relations problem they had that needed to be solved, so they told Lori to find somewhere else to live and wished her a happy life. Then she returned home, but by that time I had already made small changes to our previous living conditions. I left that house within 2 days of her leaving. I only took 2 suitcases of things with me and put the rest in storage. I moved in with my sister. As for the rented house and the furniture and all of Lori's things that she left behind after I failed to put them in trash bags when I threw her out, I didn't do anything with them, strictly speaking. The fact is that, while walking around the city center, I remembered the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." Inspired by this, I went to Home Depot, made 20 copies of my house key, and gave them to the homeless people who were camped under the railroad bridge downtown. I also gave them an address and letters saying that they could live in the house as my guests and use everything there. I also gave out $20 bills for taxis so they could get there. Yes, I took the money from the cash advance on Lori's credit card. They doubted my intentions, but that evening the weather forecast said there would be heavy rain, so they decided to take a chance. A couple of people settled in the garden for the first night, but after getting wet, they decided to move inside. They lived in the house for almost 10 days before Lori returned. As far as I know, she was surprised that they were there. I heard it took her 2 days to get rid of them all. She ended up paying them to leave. Luckily, they didn't leave much of a mess. They left almost nothing. Somehow, they even managed to take away the toilets. They tried to remove the washer and dryer, but were unable to get them through the laundry room door. I don't think Lori got her deposit back. By that time, I was already hiding with my sister. When asked, she told Lori that I had gone to Norway. I did leave for Europe, but a little later and in a different direction. I knew Lori would get a refund on her airfare, so I was sure she would want me to go too. After all, why shouldn't we both be unhappy? The air ticket for my trip was the last purchase on her card. No, correction, penultimate. The last purchase was a Eurail ticket, 10 days and 2 months for young people. I never thought of myself as a youth at 23, almost 24, but according to Eurail rules, you're a youth until you're 27. This ticket gave you 10 days of unlimited train travel for 2 months, plus discounts on ferries. Perfect. Add to that the fact that I was taking adult classes at the local college, and with my student ID, I was considered a student at all the museums, so I received all the youth discounts. Very civilized. My penultimate purchase with Lori's credit card was a prepayment for 5 nights at the Doubletree Hilton in the Chelsea area of London, near Imperial Wharf on the Thames. I've never traveled abroad before, and I've heard that jet lag can be a real pain, and comfort during adjustment is very important. That was good advice. I checked in early, showered, took a nap, and spent the day riding double-decker buses and walking around Westminster, the Palace, Hyde Park, and Kensington. Of course, I tried fish and chips and delicious beer. It was the first smile on my face that had nothing to do with how viciously I was taking revenge on Lori. It seemed that this was the beginning of her letting go. That doesn't mean I wasn't sad. I felt like a failure, but crying is not my habit. Yes, I can cry while watching sentimental moments in movies or on TV, and I definitely teared up on a plane across the Atlantic when the lights went out, thinking about how I wasted 5 years of my life on a woman I couldn't rely on when it happened. Important. I thought about this as I looked at Lori in the cafe, drinking her Cosmopolitan. She put the glass on the table and looked at me with determination. You left me no choice. I'm forced to use heavy artillery. And just as I was trying to imagine what kind of heavy artillery this could be, my phone beeped about a new message. On the interception with Afterburner Maverick. I smiled and looked up, and suddenly she appeared, rushing in, placing her left hand on my shoulder, turning around and sitting on my lap, and with her right hand she pulled my head down to kiss me on the lips. She then looked at Lori, who was looking at her with an expression of shock and beginning rage. "Here comes Malibu Barbie," my partner said with a smile. "Hello, bring me some clean vodka, guy." And quickly, my partner commanded the waiter, who suddenly appeared, as if he expected or even hoped that the girls would start a fight, tearing each other's shirts. "Alive, more alive. Hello, hello," she added, waving the waiter away. To his surprise, he complied. Then she turned and shouted across the table over Lori's shoulder, "Hey, the guy in the hat." The unshaven guy at the next table, pretending not to listen and wearing a knitted hat, even though it was summer, reluctantly turned around. "Yes, you hipster idiot. Get the hell out of your tweet, bastard." He looked like he wanted to say something, but my partner is a force of nature when she gets annoyed. At this point, she looked like she was about to jump over the table and hit him with her own mug, so he picked up his tablet and walked away. Most of the other eavesdroppers took this opportunity to also leave, leaving us alone on the veranda. Lori just watched her in shock. I enjoyed this performance. The waiter appeared with vodka and handed it to my partner, who drank half of it in one gulp. The bastard was live streaming your story on Twitter. He looks exactly like his avatar. I read all of his posts on the way here, so I'm aware of everything you and her set up until the point where she said she didn't date Deshaun while you were together. She put down the vodka and held me at arm's length, looking into my eyes with a wide smile, while Lori looked like she was about to choke with rage. "It's good to see you again, Esteban. We ran into each other in London, my partner and I. More precisely, she simply pushed me away. One of the nice things about the Chelsea Hilton is the bar right off the lobby. I rested there, watching through the window as a torrential downpour flooded London. Feeling grateful to be inside and dry, I decided that the new, post-Lori night I'd try wine instead of beer and drink something the bartender recommended, a second helping to be precise. He poured it generously, so in American terms I was probably already on my third or even fourth glass when I saw her. Another nice feature of the hotel, in addition to the bar, were the very beautiful girls from Eastern Europe at the reception. Not exactly a model, but with that reliable, strong beauty that makes men want to live better, to be worthy of them. Dangerous beauty, in other words. I was ready to devote my new moral life to becoming worthy of Joanna, the very beautiful green-eyed Polish woman who was on duty at the counter that evening. I came up with some stupid questions about local landmarks to get her to talk to me more and maybe accidentally touch my arm while she drew directions on the little city map they had on the counter. I almost walked up to the counter and was getting ready to speak when suddenly a wet rat pushed me away. My reaction was a little slow due to the drink, so it took me a moment to realize that the wet rat was in fact a young woman, soaking wet and completely miserable. She was also clearly American in her mannerisms and volume. She began to tell Joanna some long, complicated story of her troubles when Joanna raised her hand to stop her. The rat stopped, albeit reluctantly. "Sorry, miss," said Joanna, "but this gentleman was in front of you, I believe." The rat looked at me. I thought she couldn't be wetter unless she was underwater. Her dark hair hung in wet strands around her tired face. From the place where she stood with her wet suitcase, a long puddle stretched to the door. I slowly looked around the puddle, then looked at the rat, and then at Joanna, who began to smile at my reaction. She must have sensed that I was a little tipsy. "Joanna," I finally said, "I think she needs to talk to you more than I do." "I'll wait." Joanna's smile widened and her face became like that of a goddess. Now I no longer wanted to live simply better in order to be worthy of it. I wanted to live the best life possible, even if it meant 20 years of treating orphans for worms in Somalia before we could be together. A slight relief flashed across the rat's face, but it was very small. She approached Joanna and explained the sad story of how she had been booked into another Hilton across town using her dad's points, but there was a problem with the booking. Her flight was delayed, she had problems with her card, so she had no cash, and she was on the tube, which also had problems, so they delayed the flights, and then it started to rain, and she ended up here in Chelsea because Hilton said there might be a room here, but they couldn't book it because for system problems, so she needs to check in person. And here she is. And this is her last chance. Joanna listened to all this in a friendly manner, said that she was sorry to hear about all these problems, and promised to see what could be done. She turned to the computer and began to type something, her brow furrowing as she typed. Finally, she stopped, took a deep breath, and told the rat the bad news. I had taken the last available number. This guy, she pointed at me. All rooms are booked. The rat looked at me with such an expression as if it was ready to kill me, but was too tired. Crap. I'll have to spend an extra 10 years in Somalia unless I do something dramatic. Maybe I can help, I said. Both women looked at me. Joanna looked slightly intrigued and amused. The rat was wary. The young lady can share a room with me until she finds something else, I suggested. Joanna looked shocked. The rat looked like he was going to pounce on me and strangle me because I was essentially inviting him to sell his dignity for a roof over his head. And then I played my trump card. I extended my right hand, clenched it into a fist, and extended my little finger. I admit that there is only one bed in the room, but I give you a pinky promise that I will be a true gentleman while you are my guest. The rat's expression changed from anger to shock. But Joanna was just a picture. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree. A huge smile spread across her face, her eyes wide in surprise. She became a goddess again. The smile was great, but it was obvious that she was having a hard time not laughing. I was hoping the rat would tell me to go to hell so I wouldn't have to essentially share my room, but instead I could spend time discussing my nobility with Joanna, which would shorten my stay in Somalia. Then a flaw in my plan was discovered. The rat was so desperate that he seriously considered the offer. She turned to Joanna. "What do you think?" she asked like a woman to a woman. Joanna looked at both of us, amused. "He behaved well today. We have his personal information in the database if anything happens. And in the end, it's a pinky promise." She left the thought hanging in the air. The rat hesitated. Then she said, "Okay." She extended her right hand and clasped her little fingers with me. "But if you try anything, I'll knock you out," she added. I nodded that I understood. Joanna insisted on writing down the rat's details and adding it to the booking for my protection. I didn't think about it, but it made sense. The passport turned out to be one of the few things that the rat carried with him that was still dry, all thanks to a few plastic bags. I asked Joanna for room service to bring extra hangers, as I was sure the rat would want to hang something. Joanna nodded, her smile still beaming as we headed towards the elevators. "Steve," I said, holding out my hand. "Margaret," she answered, shaking mine. "But call me Maggie and I'll kill you." I looked at her. "Maggie, Maggie, Maggie Bo Baggy," I said, closing my eyes in anticipation of the blow and stretching my chin forward. When the blow did not come, I opened my eyes. Despite everything, she smiled. "Just checking," I said. "I'm too tired now. I'll kill you later." As the elevator reached our floor, I said, "You know, you have anger problems. You've threatened me at least 3 times so far." She looked at me and said, "You have no idea." I opened the door for her. Thought I'd ask her if she wanted to get completely naked before we had sex on the bed, or if she'd rather just pull her pants down and bend over the table, but decided to give her space instead. She found one set of clothes that were more or less dry, hidden deep in her suitcase, and, armed with extra hangers, began hanging things up to dry. I said I'd go to the lobby and invited her to join me for a snack when she was ready. I returned to the lobby to find Joanna quietly talking to Alexandra, an equally beautiful blonde from Hungary, at the front desk. They stopped when they saw me and smiled. They both raised their right hands, extended their little fingers, and, shaking them, burst into fits of giggles. The bartender left my tab open and asked if I wanted another glass of Merlot. I agreed. 30 minutes later, Margaret came downstairs, refreshed from her shower, wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and looking quite attractive. She wasn't enough to live her best life, but she was definitely enough to live better than average. She dried her wavy dark hair, and it made all the difference. It looked like her shoes and socks were wet because she was wearing flip-flops, which allowed me to notice that her graceful feet had blue toenails that matched her fingernails. But what struck me was her face. Her wary gaze and wide smile signaled leprosy. I looked into her hazel eyes and immediately thought of how I could break my pinky promise with honor. I glanced at Joanna and Alexandra, who were watching, pretending not to, and I was worried that they were reading my unclean thoughts, so I tried to calm down. The bartender came up. Margaret surprised me by asking for a double shot of vodka and then a glass of the same thing I was drinking because she needed to catch up. The bartender laughed and went to get her order. "Maggie, you'll get drunk," I warned. She looked into my eyes. "I told you, don't call me Maggie." I hate this nickname. My jerk ex gave it to me before we broke up right before I flew away. "Sorry," I said. "What do others call you then?" "Everyone else, including my parents, calls me Margie. But now I don't like it either. I'm here in Europe to start my study abroad year early, and I'm about to change myself." Margie was the girl who let some cheating bastard call her Maggie and tell her he loved her and wanted to marry her, then got her roommate into bed before they both told her it was only sex. Margie is the girl whose parents told her to forgive that bastard because boys will always be boys, and they've been with him since high school, so they can't break up. This Margie, aka Maggie, died. My new life begins tonight. The bartender returned with her drinks. She drank the vodka in one gulp, even before he had time to put the glass of wine on the table. The bartender looked at me with a slightly raised eyebrow and walked away. "What about Peggy?" I asked. She had already raised the wine to her lips before I could finish the question. "No one ever called me Peggy," she replied. "It's a form of Margaret," I said. "I know, but no one has ever used it. My middle name is Susan, so you can see why." We both laughed. "Okay," I said. "Understood. Peggy will do, not Peggy Sue." "Let's try it," she replied, and we clink our glasses. "What about your story, Steve?" "Fuck Steve. He's married to a cheater and has just filed for divorce so he can start his life over." "Trouble doesn't come alone, huh?" she asked. "Apparently so." "What about Stefan?" "No. Looks too much like Steve." "Etienne?" "No way." "What is your last name?" "Miller." Peggy began to smile. "How about Esteban Molinero? This is the Spanish form of your name. You can be a Latin lover." I laughed. "Okay, Senorita Peggy, I'm the famous bullfighter Esteban Molinero from Toledo, but not the one in Ohio. You will be my flamenco sister." We laughed, clinked glasses again, and ordered sandwiches. We ate, drank more wine, and told each other stories, although I tried to be as vague as possible in mine. After a while, we decided to call it a night. As we walked past the front desk, Joanna and Alexandra looked at me sternly when Peggy wasn't looking and waved their pinkies. They apparently thought I might not keep my promise, perhaps because I couldn't help but look at Peggy's ass as she walked ahead of me to the elevators. Her ass was noteworthy in the sense that, damn, I'm a sculptor, and I need to carve that ass out of stone to preserve it for posterity. I made a circle with the index finger and thumb of my left hand and began to move the little finger of my right hand in this ring, winking at Joanna and Alexandra. I drank enough to afford it. Let's be honest. It wouldn't have worked out with Joanna. It's the same with Alexandra. I will never become a doctor to treat worms in orphans. Alexandra, despite my tactlessness, laughed silently as we walked past, and Joanna stood with her hands on her hips and glared at me with an icy gaze. I just smiled and waved over my shoulder. When we got to our room, Peggy washed her face, brushed her teeth, looked at me with a kind of languid look, climbed into the king-size bed in the sweatpants she was wearing, and immediately fell sound asleep. I noticed that she lay down on the same side of the bed that Lori usually slept on. I drank a couple glasses of water to avoid a hangover, put on sleep shorts and a t-shirt, and went to bed too. I'd already seen enough of Peggy's body in silhouette, even in her baggy sweatpants, to make me hard, so it took me a while to fall asleep. Peggy's alcohol-induced snoring calmed me, and I eventually passed out. I woke up first and found Peggy cuddled up to me, half lying on my left side, her hand on my chest. Lori did this too. I assumed that Peggy slept with her ex-boyfriend the same way. My left arm was wrapped around her, and my hand was resting on the small of her back. With Lori, I would move my hand down to her ass and begin to slowly stroke along the crease of her buttocks. This always woke her up with the engine running. I tried my best not to try the same thing with Peggy. Moments later, she began to wake up, looking sleepy, tried to get her bearings, suddenly realized where she was and who she was with, and immediately panicked, quickly pulling away. "Sorry," we said at the same time and laughed. "It's okay," we said again in unison and laughed again. We moved away from each other as far as the bed would allow and dozed off a little. The biggest surprise for both of us, when we were finally fully awake and able to take it all in, was that we weren't as hungover as we'd expected. Peggy discovered that most of her clothes had dried overnight. She went into the shower first, and I looked out the window and saw that the rain from yesterday had stopped and the sky was clear and blue. When she came out, I told her to check to see if any of the girls from last night were at the front desk. When she asked why, I told her that they would probably want to know if I kept my pinky promise. She laughed and left. One shower later, I followed her. Alexandra was at the counter, but Joanna was not there. It looked like the girls were working double shifts. Alexandra and Peggy were talking quietly when I appeared. When they saw me, they immediately fell silent. I said good morning and headed to the restaurant for breakfast. Peggy soon joined me. I never asked what they talked about with Alexandra. At breakfast, Peggy announced that since I had behaved like a gentleman the night before, I could accompany her while she explored the city if I wanted. I'm not a fool. I immediately accepted the invitation. It was a wonderful day. We took a long walk along the river to Parliament, turned west, and ended up at the Victoria Memorial in front of Buckingham Palace, just in time to see the changing of the guard. We had a light lunch, walked around Hyde Park, and ended up in Notting Hill, where she insisted we have afternoon tea. This was funny, I thought. I had already been to these places the day before, but today was much more fun with a beautiful girl who was ready to smile and easy to communicate with. We were in a bohemian place with sofas instead of chairs. We sat next to each other, still drinking tea, to combat the effects of jet lag, and because it was London. I thought I couldn't drink any more tea when a frown appeared on Peggy's face. She was looking at her phone. I gave her a couple of minutes until she started to get nervous before I spoke. "Is something wrong? Is the internet not working?" "No," she said without looking up from the screen. "I've been looking for updates on a story I was following before I left the States, but nothing new is happening. It's very annoying. She was all over the news a couple of weeks ago, and now there's nothing." "What story?" "A local weather presenter cheated on her husband with an ex-footballer, a sports commentator from her channel, but the husband found out, burned her on Twitter and Facebook, and both the wife and the sports guy were taken off the air. I haven't seen an update in weeks. I'm addicted to this story. I'm going to have withdrawal symptoms soon if I don't get an update." I got goosebumps as she spoke. "Last night, I told her that I caught my wife cheating, and we are getting a divorce, but a little more. I let Peggy talk more about her boyfriend who cheated on her. I decided to be careful. Why is this story interesting to you?" "The other side of my story, in general terms," she said, looking at me from under the screen. "You know how terrible it feels when you yourself are betrayed. I would like to hug this guy and tell him that everything will be fine. Besides, he's probably handsome. From the photographs I saw, the weather forecaster's wife very beautiful. Surely, her husband is tall and muscular. I would like to console him," she said with a sly smile and a look. I couldn't help myself and started laughing. I have a pretty healthy ego, or I did until that bitch cheated on me, but I'm not pumped up. I don't think of myself as handsome. I don't have abs. I'm just an ordinary guy who keeps himself in good shape, and who half the internet thinks is a loser because his stunning wife cuckolded him. Peggy was puzzled. "What's so funny? Have you seen the photographs of this weather forecaster's husband?" "No, he keeps a low profile. There are no photos of him in any stories. His Twitter profile is of his wife kissing a sports guy. Everything else on his social networks is closed, except for posts about her cheating. His social media accounts don't even have his full name. His friends don't tell anyone anything either." "What is the name of this weather forecaster?" "Lori Miller." She frowned in realization. "You're not going to say that she's your relative, Esteban." "Not really." I took out my phone. I deleted all of Lori's photos, but they could be recovered from the recently deleted folder. I found one of our photos from a weekend trip to the Bahamas to celebrate her getting a TV job. We stand together on the beach in our swimsuits, Lori looking at me with adoration, and I look at the camera. One of the waiters at the resort was kind enough to take this photo, but he was terrible at composing a shot or waiting for both of us to look into the lens. I handed my phone to Peggy. Can't be. Maybe. Let me give you a hug. I have to say, though, that handsome guys like us like pleasure more than hugs. But that can wait until the hotel. If Peggy heard me, she didn't pay attention. She was busy studying the photo carefully, enlarging it to see all the details. Unbelievable, she finally said, handing the phone back to me and looking into my eyes with sympathy. She's stunningly beautiful. Then she turned completely towards me, sat in the lotus position, rested her chin on her hands, looked me straight in the eyes, smiled, and said, "Tell me everything." I started telling the story from the moment Lori and I first met. Peggy asked questions from time to time, but otherwise listened like a police officer during an interrogation. She made me go back and reiterate the fact that Lori's credit card was paying for our hotel stay and my train ticket to Europe, as well as my legal fees for the divorce. This made her laugh well. I had to tell her twice about how I invited all the homeless people to live in our house after I left because she laughed so much. In the end, I had nothing more to say. Telling all this turned out to be cathartic. We paid the bill and went looking for somewhere to have dinner. As soon as we walked out the door, Peggy threw herself into my arms, squeezing me like she was going to strangle me and telling me everything would be okay. I hugged her back, but more softly. We then went looking for a Chinese restaurant, hugging each other, singing Werewolves of London by Warren Zevon. Her "alwas" were better than mine. She did it seriously, but I didn't. Let's be honest, this is not a serious song. That night at the hotel, Joanna was on shift again. She smiled at us and waved her little finger. We did the same and laughed as we headed towards the elevators. With her clothes dry, Peggy climbed into bed, wearing a long t-shirt and panties. I desperately wanted to get her into bed and have sex with her, but I made a pinky promise. When I got into bed, she asked me to hug her. I waited a moment, thinking about the rotten fish, to let the excitement subside before I did it. As I pressed myself against her, she pressed herself against my groin and positioned my arms so that I would hug her the way she wanted. I asked you to do this because I like to sleep with someone hugging me. And I know I can trust you, even if we just met yesterday, she said, placing my right hand on her stomach. I couldn't help myself. I got horny again. Even so, she whispered, moving her pelvis. Calm down, boy, she said with a laugh and kissed my left hand. Why? Why what? She asked. How do you know you can trust me even though we only met yesterday? She turned her head to look at me. A guy who makes pinky promises is a hopeless romantic. I think you're the type to choose a partner for life. I'm sure you're very reliable. That's what I think. I'm sure I could trust you with my money. I stood up to look down at her. You sound like it's a bad thing. She simply smiled and shrugged. I turned off the light. When we lay down, I whispered in her ear. The only reason I wouldn't run off with your money is if the hotel room is paid for until the end of the week. Will do. A few moments later, I heard her breathing deepen as she fell asleep. I leaned over and saw that she still had a smile on her face. She really felt nice in my arms. Somehow, I also fell asleep. In the morning, when I woke up, we were again in the same position. She was lying on my side, her hand on my chest and my left hand on her back, ready to lift her t-shirt and start stroking her buttocks. Again, I didn't do it because I made a pinky promise. This time when she woke up, neither of us said sorry. At this moment, I made a pleasant discovery. We weren't hungover that morning, and I wanted to go for a run. I wanted to be a good host, so I suggested that I was going for a run if Peggy didn't mind. Oh no, I'm not going to, she said quickly, surprising me. Before I could protest, she added, not without me. Before I knew what was happening, she pulled a handful of clothes out of her suitcase, headed into the bathroom, and then came out, already dressed in tight black shorts and an aquamarine sports bra, over which she pulled a tank top. While I stood there in surprise, she looked at me. "I thought you wanted to run, Esteban. Quickly, quickly, let's go." I quickly got dressed, and before I knew it, we were running along Chelsea Embankment on the north bank of the Thames, heading east. She was a head shorter than me and 25 kilos lighter, but she really made me tense. She still ran briskly when I wanted to slow down. As a man, I couldn't afford that, so I tried to keep up. After 5 kilometers, we crossed the river at Vauxhall Bridge and headed west. We quickly zipped through Battersea Park and then crossed the river again on the Albert Bridge. Back on Chelsea Embankment, she began to speed up. My male pride did not allow failure, and I also increased the pace. We ended up running the competition back to where we started. She won. My lungs were burning. "It was a nice, easy run to clear away the cobwebs," she told me with a smile, and I knew she was making fun of me. "I let you win because I'm a gentleman." Ha! We spent that day visiting the Tower and the London Eye. Then we went to a pub on the south bank of the Thames near Tower Bridge. We just sat together, enjoying the buzz of conversation in the busy bar. I thought how easy it was to be with her. She was looking at her phone again, but felt my gaze. "What?" she asked. I shrugged. I was just thinking about how this trip turned out to be so much better than I expected when I boarded the plane at the beginning of the week. Peggy's eyes scanned my face. Then her jaw tensed in decision. "You need to have some real sex," she announced. I laughed. Yes. Yes. When was the last time? There was no point in lying. I told her a lot the day before. A couple of months ago. She shook her head. A couple. In May, a couple of quick pleasures that were more like self-pity. "We need to fix this." I didn't say anything, and she just looked at me, lost in her thoughts. After a moment, she began to smile. "I know," she announced. "I can be your wingman and help you pick girls that I think would be good and tell them about you." I laughed, but she looked serious, although she was smiling. "Wingman is supposed to be the guy who distracts the pretty girl's ugly friend so the ace can woo the beauty, and you're not a guy." Same principle. When I'm around you, I show other women that you're safe. I'll tell them the short version of your story, making sure they know you're involved with a nice, famous person. You'll be successful quickly. "Why do you need this?" "Just helping out a friend who helped me when I needed it. What do you say, Maverick?" You know that the movie Top Gun is actually an allegory of a man's struggle with his own unusual sexual orientation, right? What? Shut up. Kelly McGillis is straight and icy, and his crew are trying to force Maverick down the wrong path. Check the internet. Peggy thought for a moment. "Are you saying that Malibu Barbie made you gay?" "Malibu Barbie. This is something new." "Maybe. All the more reason to get you back into the game." "What about you?" "Your breakup was worse. Let's deal with you first. Once you succeed, then you can be my wingman and help me get laid." I looked at her. She was serious. Not about sex, but about the fact that she needs help to make it happen. "You don't need help," I told her. "All you have to do is look at the guy and smile." She blushed and pushed my chest, but didn't say anything else. Around that moment, the women's university soccer team from Spain entered the pub, all wearing identical training jackets with their team name Los Aguilas, the Eagles. Peggy immediately perked up. "We have a wealthy target audience here, Maverick. If you start singing You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', I'll go out the back door and call a taxi to the hotel." "I'll do better," she said, and then shouted to the girls, "Oi, chicas, equiane gano?" The one closest to us, a petite dark girl with black eyes, surprised to hear her native language, turned, looked at us, and said in perfect English, "We smeared them." Due to limited space, she and two of her friends joined Peggy and me. "I'm Peggy, and this is Esteban," she said, pointing at me. All the girls smiled. "Esteban." I shrugged. Long story. Peggy took the lead. "Esteban, be of service. Go get these young ladies something to drink." Luckily, they all just wanted beer, so ordering was easy. I came back, and they were all chatting away in Spanish. As soon as I brought the drinks, the conversation stopped, and they all stared at me. The chatty one, Sonia, asked me, Esteban, with special emphasis on the name, because she knew it was not real. If you are still married, where is your ring? I glanced at Peggy, who just batted her eyes. I sold it as soon as I confirmed that the bitch had taken a lover. Sonia and Veronica laughed. The third girl, Patricia, was busy looking at her phone. She got excited when she found something and showed it to the other two. Peggy whispered, They're checking your story. I know Sonia is more outgoing, but Veronica has the best body. And she's interested. Every time you look at her, she pushes her breasts forward and plays with her hair. Catch her, stud. With that, Peggy stood up and disappeared in the direction of the restroom, becoming the first woman in human history to go to a public restroom alone. By that time, the girls had finished checking my details and were looking at me with sympathy. Do you want to talk about it? Veronica asked. I noticed that Peggy was right. She truly had the best body. Her face was also the most beautiful. I usually like wavy hair, but her shoulder-length straight hair suited her really well. They were black to match her eyes. Her lips were full and red. Her teeth were so white they almost blinded me. No, I said honestly. Tell me about your game and what you're doing here. These were magic words. The three of them began an animated conversation directed at me, but without requiring my participation. It turned out that their university had a partnership with a school in England, and they always played a football match at the beginning of the summer, alternating teams with trips. The Spanish team usually won. Unlike in the US, most of these girls still lived at home, so this was one of the few opportunities to get away from their parents. Sonia and Patricia had one more year of study left before they would receive their degrees. Veronica was studying to become a doctor, so she still had 3 years left. Peggy sat next to me again while the girls talked. She slowly ran her hand down my leg. I immediately became horny. Her hand stopped in my pocket, then she put something there. I glanced sideways at her, but she was talking in Spanish with Sonia and Patricia. Veronica looked first at Peggy and then at me, and her breasts actually protruded forward a little. I looked at her chest and then raised my eyes to her face. She noticed that I did this and smiled. She moved closer to my other side and leaned over to whisper, Is Peggy your girlfriend now since you don't have a wife anymore? No, she's just a friend. She looked at me as if she didn't believe me. I leaned in to whisper to her some more. She's actually my wingman. Wingman. Like fighters in dogfights, I said, waiting to see if she would understand. I continued. It's as if she were the pilot of another plane. She has my back. Veronica furrowed her eyebrows, trying to understand the English idioms. Then she smiled. Why doesn't she hunt you herself? I made her a pinky promise that I would be a gentleman. I had to explain this. Veronica needed an explanation with the participation of Sonia and Patricia. Peggy had to confirm the accuracy of my gentlemanly behavior. All three Spanish girls thought the idea was crazy funny. Having stopped laughing, Veronica said that she felt hot and needed fresh air. She stood up and headed towards the door. Sonia and Patricia watched me. Peggy pushed me in the ribs. Taking the hint, I said, I'll go check on her, and followed her out the door. Leaving the building, I looked around and saw Veronica standing, leaning on the railing above the concrete wall that stretched along the river embankment. Tower Bridge towered above us, and the Tower of London could be seen across the river. As I approached her, I felt in my pocket where Peggy had been with her fingers earlier and found 3 condoms in a package. I moved them deeper into my pants. I approached Veronica. She turned and smiled. If I drink too much beer, I just feel sleepy, she said. Would you like to go for a walk to cheer yourself up? Cold. We walked along the river, enjoying the warm evening, until we reached the end of the embankment. Then we turned around and walked in the opposite direction. We found a place where they sold ice cream and sat down on a bench. She insisted on asking again why I wasn't interested in Peggy, saying that Peggy's was very beautiful. It seemed that I had finally managed to convince her that I would never break my promise not to get involved with Peggy. Later, Veronica told me about her childhood in Madrid in a large family with uncles, aunts, and cousins scattered throughout Latin America, the United States, and Europe. She was the youngest of 4 children. Eventually, I told her about Lori, and she took my hand. When I finished, Veronica moved closer to kiss my cheek, but she caught me off guard. I assumed she was drunk and didn't want to take advantage of it and turned to say something. And then her cheek kiss turned into a tongue kiss, which surprised both of us. Then I didn't care if I was taking advantage of the situation, and I realized that her kiss was not drunk at all. We recovered, pulled away from each other, and then returned to the kiss, as if we were doing it seriously. Just as I would normally move my hand under her shirt, her phone vibrated with a message. "Oh," she said, "the bus is leaving. They are waiting for me." I didn't see the rest of the messages. We hurried back and saw that the rest of the team was waiting for us. When they saw us, the whole team howled, screamed, cheered, and started chanting, "Kiss her, kiss her, kiss her." So I did it, just out of politeness. When we finished, and I didn't have time to say anything, she said, "I want to see you again when your life gets better, if you're still single, and if you finally get divorced. If I wanted a married man to chase me, I would already have many such options at home. So hurry up with the divorce." With that, she left, only stopping to grab Peggy and talk to her intensely for a few seconds. Peggy looked surprised and then nodded. Veronica ran to the bus, and we waved after her. I wondered what she said to Peggy, but I couldn't bring myself to ask. After the bus left, Peggy and I turned to call a taxi to the hotel, and Peggy asked, "How many condoms do you have left?" "All." "Does that mean I at least gave you pleasure?" I suddenly stopped. "Did you still have fun?" Peggy asked in surprise. But that was not the point. I realized that I had ruined everything. Damn, I didn't take her number, or her email, or even her last name. And now she's gone. Peggy's smile made me freeze. "Calm down, Maverick. I'm here to cover your back, remember? Sonia, Patty, and I worked everything out while you were hanging out with her. We exchanged full information about each other. I emailed you everything while you two were kissing." She told me this with a smug smile. I just looked at her. "Herrera," she said. "What?" "Her last name is Veronica Maria de Los Angeles Herrera Gutierrez." She deliberately said RR loudly. "You're up to something." "I know." I slapped her on the ass and then put my arm around her shoulders, and we walked along the embankment. Back at the hotel, we climbed into bed. "You know what, Maverick? That was one hell of a kiss." "How can a woman turn me on and then immediately leave my life?" I said casually, pretending I wasn't serious. This remark evoked a mysterious look. "What?" Peggy simply shook her head, looking at me with a look that I couldn't decipher. I broke the awkward silence by adding, "She said you have a nice butt." Peggy's gaze didn't change. I couldn't decipher her facial expression. I gave up trying and rolled over to turn off the light. "Do you want me to hug you tonight?" I asked. "No," she said without emotion. She rolled over onto her side, facing away from me. I was afraid that she was angry with me for some reason and decided not to insist. After a while, I fell into a light sleep. About half an hour later, I woke up from a strange sound. It was the sound of friction, and there was heavy breathing. The bed rocked slightly. I listened until I was sure that Peggy was satisfying herself. Then I turned on my side to look at her. I immediately became horny. She was lying on her back, and as soon as she realized that I was awake, she immediately stopped what she was doing. Damn Veronica. She still turned me on and then left my life. That decided everything. A pinky promise didn't mean just watching the other party pleasure itself and doing nothing. "You know, it's much more pleasant if someone is holding you tightly," I told her. Without waiting for permission, I put my left hand behind her neck and my right hand on her shoulder. I brought my lips to hers and started kissing her. She did not resist, and after a moment began to kiss back. I stopped the kiss. Go back to what you were doing, you horny bitch. I started kissing her again. After a moment, I stopped again. Take off your clothes, I told her. In the dim light, I saw concern on her face. I told her, the pinky promise still applies. I won't take advantage of you, but you really need to feel free. She didn't say anything, but quickly took off her t-shirt and panties and lay back down. Her breathing quickened. She waited until I hugged her again before resuming my touching with renewed vigor. She relaxed a little, but seemed to be struggling within herself. Finally, she nodded. I touched her breasts first. They immediately tensed up. I then ran my hand down her chest and stomach. Her skin broke out in goosebumps. I kissed her, and she responded enthusiastically. Every time I stopped kissing her, she whispered an endless stream of hoarse words. Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. She was breathing as if she had just finished a race, having passed me again. She lay on her back, her rapid breathing beginning to slow, unable to form words. Her eyes finally focused, and she looked at me in surprise. I could have sex with her, and she wouldn't resist. Instead, I just hugged her. After about 5 minutes, she turned to me, without saying a word, and kissed me on the lips. Then she pulled away, looked at me with a mischievous smile, and began to pull off my t-shirt. I had to sit down to help her take it off. She threw it towards the bed. She then started to pull my shorts down, pushing my ass up to get them off. When I was left completely naked, she began to pleasure me. She looked up from time to time to see if I liked it. I certainly liked it. After some time, we had sex. After that, she turned her back to me. Now you can hug me. I did just that. Peggy stroked my arms as I hugged her tightly, but the more I thought, the more awkward I felt. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. It was great, but I feel like I just cheated. Without thinking, she replied, of course he did, but Malibu Barbie did it first, and she did it more times. You're just starting to catch up. I laughed. Who needs to think about Lori anyway? Lori who? I was talking about Veronica. Now Peggy laughed. Oh, about her. No, you're in the clear here. Right before she jumped on the bus, she grabbed me and said, take care of him until I see him again. You can sleep with him if you want, but don't take over his heart. What? That's all she said, but her friends gave me full instructions before you left, Maverick. It's all clear now. She's a serious student and very rarely goes on dates. She wants to become a doctor, so she studies all the time to get the best grades. For some reason, she was interested in you. She was probably drunk, and when she sobered up, you would be out of work. But right now, she wants to make sure that you are there, available when you finally understand what you are doing with your life. In other words, my mission, if I choose to accept it, is to keep you busy until you pull your head out of your ass. She said the last words with a smile, looking at me over her shoulder. Strange strategy, I said. Oh, as if you have anything else in life to complain about. Well, if you say so. Just don't fall in love with me. I will try. Peggy turned to face me at this. I'm serious. I think you're the type to fall in love. You're not talking about casual sex. And that's great, but let's not overthink it all now. Let's just enjoy the moment, okay? I must have looked hesitant because Peggy decided to up the ante. Pinky promises that you won't fall in love with me. She extended her right little finger. I agree, I said, provided that you also accept the same conditions. Ha, she said with a wide smile. This will never happen. I pretended to be offended. What? I didn't rock your world? You're doing well. She took my hand, turned so that I was hugging her, and wrapped my arm around her. Before falling asleep, she said, you're doing well enough that I can say Malibu Barbie is crazy for leaving you, and I thought meteorologists were supposed to be smart. She's not a meteorologist. She's just a sexy weather presenter. Sorry, weather forecaster. Maybe. She fell silent for a moment. Was she right? Who? Veronica. About what? About my butt. Do I have a good butt? Oh yeah, I didn't need her opinion on it. I saw it the first night. If it weren't for that damn pinky promise, I would have had sex with you the second we got upstairs. Good to know. She fell silent again. What about my breasts? I reached out and squeezed both breasts. They filled my palms. They're doing their job, I said, squeezing them a little tighter. I kissed her neck, and she moved her butt on my lap, while moving my hands lower so that they cupped her stomach. Then she said, "And by the way, if Malibu Barbie really made you gay, you're not going to be very good at it." We woke up still hugging. I would have loved to have stayed like this, but Peggy said it was time to get up and go for a run before breakfast because we had a busy day. We were planning to leave for Windsor this morning. For this run, we headed into the city through Chelsea, Belgravia, past Buckingham Palace, and into Hyde Park. We ran slower because we had to cross streets, and at intersections, it took extra effort to remember that drivers were driving on the other side. It was a sweltering morning, and we returned to the hotel soaking wet with sweat. We came out the side door when we left and didn't go past the front desk. But when we returned, we saw that Joanna and Alexandra were at the counter again. As we passed them, Peggy insisted that we hold hands and swing them so the girls could see. They saw it, and their eyes widened. Peggy smiled widely at them. I just shrugged. Up in the room, after I took off my shirt, Peggy insisted on sniffing my chest, licking the sweat off me and telling me I was absolutely disgusting. I was about to answer something when suddenly she took off all her clothes except her shoes and socks and got ready for sex, saying that she wanted quick morning sex to start the day. Fortunately, I was able to arrange this. We showered together and went down for breakfast, again passing Joanna and Alexandra, who just laughed. While we were eating, it suddenly occurred to me that Lori had always wanted to shower right after sex. And that was the last thing I thought about her that day. Peggy and I spent the rest of our time in London as newlyweds on our honeymoon. We almost never stopped touching each other. The day after Windsor, we went to look at antiquities at the British Museum. On our last day, as we left to catch the train to Dover, Joanne wrote out the bill for us. Peggy leaned toward her and said quietly, "I want you to know that he was a true gentleman, but I'm not a lady." She leaned back with a wide smile, which Joanna repeated before laughing. Joanna then raised an eyebrow and asked, "So how?" "He's coping," Peggy replied. They both giggled. In those post-Lori days, I was happy with any public praise I could get, so I just smiled. Peggy and Joanna finally stopped giggling, kissed each other on both cheeks, and we left. After the taxi ride, we were soon hugging on the train to Dover. On the ferry to Belgium, we were wrapped up in each other on the deck, and Peggy was wearing my jacket because the wind had picked up. At that moment, I realized that it had been a long time since I thought about Lori for a long time, and that she became my ideal ex. Peggy and I had a wonderful long weekend in Amsterdam. While we were sitting in a cafe, waiting to catch the train to Berlin, I called my divorce lawyer. By then, it had been more than a month since Lori had said she wanted to separate, and more than 3 weeks since she had been served with the divorce notice. My lawyer told me that the time limit for her to respond to the complaint or file a motion to dismiss it had expired. We could have sought a default judgment, but my lawyer wanted to play it safe by proving Lori had cheated. That way, if she decides to cause some drama later, we won't have to work too hard to straighten things out. Since Lori's money financed everything, I agreed. Peggy watched me while I was on the phone. She didn't file an answer. No. Did she even call your lawyer? No. Did she try to call you or send you an email? I have a new phone and a new number, and I blocked her email addresses, so I don't know. Have you tried to contact friends or relatives? They all have strict instructions to tell her I work on an oil rig off the coast of Norway, so she will forget about me. She called a few of them a couple of weeks ago and then stopped trying. Peggy shook her head. For a girl who claims she won't let you go, Malibu Barbie sure isn't trying very hard to keep you. I handed her the phone. How about you call her and tell her to come and wrestle for me? Would you be willing to wrestle her in the mud in a bikini for me? Ooh, even better, in Jell-O or chocolate pudding. Peggy looked like she was considering it. I'm sure the ratings would be great. Veronica and I could do it in a tag team format. How much does Malibu Barbie weigh? About 5 kilos heavier than you, but that's mostly in the chest, not the muscles. I haven't heard any complaints yet, Peggy said. I'm not complaining. Yours are good too, like I said. She just has them bigger. But they only seem useful for making men stupid, myself included. I don't think you were stupid. You didn't get a sporty guy and his wife into bed while you were married. They didn't ask me, I said, pretending I was going to cry. Come on, let's go, Peggy said with a grin. It's time for us to catch the train. Our train crossed northern Germany as we read and dozed, Peggy leaning on my shoulder. About halfway through, as we waited for the new passengers to board at Hanover, fiddling with my fingers, I looked at her. You know, you turned out to be a terrible partner. You haven't taken me to bed with any other girl since you took on this role. She didn't look up at me, just staring at our intertwined fingers. It turned out that I have a conflict of interest. She stood up and pulled me towards her for a kiss, when at that moment the businessman opened the compartment door, saw us, and went to look for a seat in another carriage. We laughed and clung to each other again. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur. Trains, long walks, museums and churches and sex, but not at the same time, and exhausting runs. Peggy was always ready to run 10 kilometers at dawn, except on Mondays, which were our rest days. I ran more than ever before and lost 5 pounds, despite all the food and drink we consumed. Sweaty morning sex after a run was a good incentive. After Berlin, we headed south to Prague, then Vienna, Venice, Rome, Florence, Nice, and finally Paris. What helped us avoid arguing during our travels after all, I've always heard that traveling together can cause couples to quarrel, is that we learn to give each other space. Often we would part ways after lunch to allow each of us a few hours to go at our own pace, meeting for coffee around 4, and then segueing into a nice dinner and a walk hand in hand before a final drink somewhere. We usually stayed out late because Peggy wanted to make sure we weren't too sleepy for the morning run. I would say it was killing me, but it was a rather pleasant form of death. I hardly thought about Lori. We started saving on accommodation after London, choosing small hotels and Airbnbs. Eventually, I no longer used my wife's credit card. I paid for the accommodations and Peggy paid for most of the food and transportation that was not covered by our Eurail passes. I still had most of the $15,000 I had withdrawn from Lori's credit card, plus what I had cashed out from my 401k and ERA when I quit my job before leaving. I know I was a fool for not taking advantage of compound interest over time, but I wasn't even 24 years old. I had time to start again. However, I wanted to save this money to give myself the opportunity to take my time returning to adulthood. Speaking of age, in Venice, on an overrated night gondola ride for Peggy's birthday, I learned that she was only 19 years old. She skipped 7th grade and started college right after she turned 17. The way she acted, I'd give her 21. On our last full day in Paris, we spent the morning at the Rodin Museum and then the Musée d'Orsay looking at sculptures. After that, we sat in the cafe, drinking a second cup of espresso because when there are so few of them, it feels like you've been cheated if you only order one. The day in early August was already hot, although it was only a little after noon. We were feeling a little lazy and were debating whether to eat ice cream first, and then lunch or lunch first, and then ice cream or ice cream, then lunch, and then more ice cream. We were leaning towards the third option. The next day, we were scheduled to catch a train that would take us to Barcelona in the late afternoon. We wanted to spend a few days there and then head south to find somewhere relatively quiet by the sea. Afterwards, we were on a train to Madrid, where Peggy would begin her 3rd year at Universidad Complutense in a few weeks. We planned to travel around the city a little and help her settle into an apartment that she had already rented with another student, so that it would be easier for her to integrate into the educational process. I didn't have the slightest idea what to do next. I knew we were rapidly approaching some kind of resolution in our relationship, and I didn't really want to get there. I was wondering if I should try to contact Veronica after Peggy got settled. Kissing her was unforgettable, but I didn't know how serious she was. We exchanged a few letters and talked on the phone, but these were poor substitutes for meetings. Peggy and I sat quietly in silence, but she finally broke it. You promised, remember? HM? You pinky swore to me that you wouldn't fall in love with me. I did the same. Do you remember this? She did not look at me, but still looked at the towers of Notre Dame above the nearby rooftops. I waited a moment, then said, "It was the hardest promise I've ever made." And for me too. We both started to tear up, but our sunglasses hid it. Of course, at this moment, the waiter finally appeared. I asked for the bill. "We'll both be sad, of course," she said, "but we'll both get through it, and I hope we'll remain friends." I wondered if it would be possible to see her again without sadness. You know you can't stay with me because one of the main goals of these exchange programs is to get out of your comfort zone, and that's impossible when there's someone I'm as comfortable with as I am with you. I was about to object, but she interrupted me. I know you would be supportive, but there are other dynamics at play here. You need to do this yourself or almost yourself, otherwise there is no point in it. And damn, I'm going to look like Lori now, but I'm only 19 years old. I'm not mature enough to settle down. She finally looked at me sadly. I reached out and took her hand. You look very smart for a teenager, I finally said. Did you miss class? She laughed and cried at the same time and hugged me like it was the end of the world. The waiter came back with the bill, but was smart enough to sneak away when he saw us. I hugged her back and allowed myself a few tears. After a moment, we relaxed, and I held her at arm's length. That doesn't mean we have to stop sleeping together, right? I asked. She smiled. No, that doesn't mean, at least for a couple of weeks. We just sat and looked into each other's eyes. And we'll still be partners when we start dating other people, she said. At least until you go somewhere. She frowned. Where are you going to go? I'll go to Madrid with you, and then I don't know. How long will you stay? Until the money is almost gone. Then we need to find some bored heiress for you while Veronica studies or until she decides to take over. But here's the condition, condoms with anyone until we are sure that the new person is worth it. Then we'll have to tell each other. And as long as we decide to be temporary partners to burn off tension, that's okay too. Agreed? She extended her right little finger. I hooked him with mine. I swear on my little finger. A sinister smile appeared on Peggy's face. If you're still married to Malibu Barbie, maybe you can take out another credit card. She has money. I saw that she was starting a show in the spring. They are already advertising it. Thank you for keeping me informed. I didn't Google anything. My lawyer says everything is going as usual. But about a credit card, no. I'll have to fly home, follow her, find out where she lives, break in, rummage through her purse, and grab more cards. It's too much work, and it's too hot to move from this chair. She'll probably cancel them this time. As for the heiress, it seems easier while Veronica is studying. If, of course, Veronica is still interested. Peggy's smile disappeared, and a worried look appeared on her face. If I'm not completely mistaken, she's starting to show her belly. At that time, it was news. Peggy looked confused, but I couldn't resist. Does Veronica have a tummy? I just kissed her. No, idiot, Peggy said, slapping me on the thigh. I'm talking about Malibu Barbie. One of the gossip sites posted a photo of her in a bikini on some beach. They revived the story and gloatingly hinted, on a hot day like today, the former hot local TV presenter looks like she has a bun in the oven, she said, shaking her head. I did the math in my head and stopped Peggy's question. I'm willing to bet €5 that it's not mine. Since March, I have always used a condom. I told her I'd read that her brand of birth control pills weren't that reliable, and I was worried about how she'd look on TV if she got pregnant. At this point, I was really worried that she had a timeshare between her legs. I'm not saying it's impossible that some swimmer didn't make it upstream, but I don't think it's likely. It's either Deshawn or one of her other suitors who is the baby's father. I was actually surprised that she didn't use this argument in court to slow down the divorce. but she seemed to just rely on ignoring everything. My mother finally called me after baby bump pictures started popping up online. My sister told her and my dad to stay away because the last thing I wanted to hear was a bunch of, "I told you so." Before I left the States, my sister was kind enough to tell me this in person, so much so that it seemed like it was said on behalf of 3 people. My mother simply breathed a sigh of relief when I assured her that it was unlikely that the child was mine. Mom wasn't ready to be a grandmother at 50, especially if Blondie, as she called Lori, was the mother. Back in the cafe in the States, I said to Peggy, "Lori just told me she's going to have to use the big guns." Peggy looked at me with confusion. "Big artillery." She then looked at Lori and back at me. "Does she have a battleship?" she asked with an expression of absolute, innocent seriousness that I knew was false as she looked back at Lori. Lori was almost seething with rage, her face turning red. At that moment, I couldn't stand it and buried my face in Peggy's neck, choking with silent laughter. I surfaced to see Peggy grinning. "I'm talking about the fact that I will introduce his son and daughter to my husband," Lori screamed. Peggy had a look of surprise on her face like Christmas morning. "Both son and daughter? Twins? Well, congratulations, Esteban. I didn't know you were so prolific, although I can't say it's surprising after the hot European summer we spent together right after you got your freedom from Malibu Barbie." Then she turned to Lori. "How old are they? When is their birthday?" Lori ignored Peggy but answered my question. 4.5 years. They were born in January after he left me. Peggy raised her head and began counting loudly on her fingers. She looked at me when she got to 9. "It will be April before our summer together. What do you think? Condoms that month." "You owe me €5, I told her. "Lori," I said, "bring the DNA tests, Barbie." I didn't intend to do this, but I subconsciously copied the nickname Barbie from Peggy. But when Maury comes back with results that show that none of them are mine, what will be the story when they let you out of the soundproof room? That Lloyd didn't take you in of your own free will. I said this mockingly. My lawyer has already found out that Lori left the father box blank on the birth certificates. Lloyd was her cameraman when she did location shooting. He was short and partly hairy. Partially hairy because his head was bald except for a strip of hair above his ears and a walrus-style mustache, but his body was covered in hair. He was overweight with an impressive man chest and a beer belly. I saw him in the shower one day at the gym. Lori's station was hosting some kind of charity event that she roped me into that involved all sorts of ridiculous sports. That's the only reason I've ever been in the shower with him. I mentioned his name because I knew from testimony given at the divorce deposition that she had not started making advances toward Deshawn at a time when a child might have been conceived, and Lloyd seemed the most unlikely candidate. Lori surprised me. First, she sat down on a chair. Then, suddenly, she straightened up, pushed her chair back, and leaned forward, putting her head between her knees as if she was about to vomit. She was deathly pale and sweating. Finally, she straightened up and hugged herself. "He didn't hurt me," she said quietly. "We just got drunk one night when I was mad at you and I was horny. Everything got out of control. You were right. The birth control pills I was taking at the time were not very reliable, and I also began to be careless about taking them." "How did you know? Did he tell you?" "I tried to keep it a secret. The last thing I want is to see him regularly for visits. I didn't even think that he knew that the children were his. He must have guessed it." Peggy just looked at her. She reached for her half-drunk vodka and handed it to me. I drank. "Wow," Peggy said. Lori looked at me with pleading eyes. "I found out," I told her, "just because I was almost sure that any child you gave birth to could not be mine. We barely touched each other in the last months we were together. Everything else I said was a bad joke. And then you confessed. That's how I found out." Lori leaned back in her chair. She seemed to want to say something, but we were interrupted. "Get away from my man," the pregnant brunette half shouted, looking at Peggy with an angry look. Peggy looked over my shoulder and answered in the same tone. "It's just sex. It doesn't mean anything. You won't lose anything from this. He'll love you even more when we're done." Peggy's expression when she said this was mocking. Lori looked at them both, confused. I kept my mouth shut. This brunette was Veronica. She looked as if murder was about to happen. "Get up," she demanded. "You know the rule," Peggy replied. "You must make a replacement." They suddenly slammed their hands together, their scowls turning into wide smiles, and Peggy jumped off my lap to hug Ronnie, who hugged Peggy back and immediately took her place on my lap. Peggy sat down in an empty chair. Damn lucha libre. Yes, I eventually contacted Veronica. I know, a brave heart will never win a fair maid, and all that, and I would like people to think that I was a romantic lover who wasted no time and captured the love of his life. Like a heat rocket, mariachi serenades melt her cold heart, although they are Mexican and not Spanish. But this would be what the British, in their understatement, would call not entirely true. The reality is that a wiser mind than mine has decided that I am incapable of managing my own emotional affairs, that I need specific guidance, and especially that I need to hurry up. This wiser mind belonged to my partner. I won't say that she was completely wrong. The following happened. After spending a few pleasant days in Barcelona, we headed down the Mediterranean coast of Spain to the town of Oliva in Valencia. We were incredibly lucky when Peggy somehow managed to rent an Airbnb apartment near the beach during the high season. It was a kind of improvisation. We knew we wanted to spend a few days on the beach before heading to Madrid, but we didn't have a specific destination in mind. Somehow, Peggy came up with the idea to go to this particular town and worked out the logistics. And in fact, we followed her schedule, because she was the one who needed to get a quick job at school. So am I. I just needed to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, but I didn't have any schedule. The new plan was to stay on the coast for a week and then finally head to Madrid. We had already spent a day and a half there. The first day, a beautiful, clear day, sunbathing on the sand with the summer tourists. We haven't had sex since our first night in Barcelona. Peggy seemed a little gloomy, but put on a brave face when I asked if everything was okay and denied that anything was wrong. We walked around the city on the morning of the second day, had lunch, and returned to the apartment. She seemed nervous for some reason, but she asked me to hold her in bed while we dozed without taking our clothes off. I happily agreed. I dozed off a bit, but it seems she didn't. We said almost nothing to each other. I just tried to enjoy each of these last moments together before we went our separate ways. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was a knock on the door. We were in an apartment on the top floor of a 2-story building. To get to our door, we had to enter a 4-digit code to the lock on the first floor. Whoever was knocking had to be a neighbor. Peggy just glanced at me over her shoulder. She had a small smile on her face, and I figured she was happy that I had to get out of bed, and she didn't. So I got up and went to open the door. A little sleepy after a nap, I didn't think to use the peephole. I opened the door and saw Joanna and Alexandra, 2 pretty blondes from the London hotel, the ones who always worked at the reception, standing there. They greeted me with huge smiles. I immediately slammed the door. In that brief second, I decided that I had gone crazy or that I had been heavily drugged with something. "What are you doing?" Peggy shouted from behind me, ran to the door, pushed me aside, and invited the girls in, immediately starting to hug and greet them. "What a warm welcome," Joanna said, standing in front of me in a pose with her hands on her sides. I didn't say anything. He simply extended the index finger of his right hand and pressed on her shoulder. She seemed to be real. "Just checking to see if I'm hallucinating," I said. Joanna frowned for a moment, then it dawned on her. "She didn't tell you anything?" "No." "Oh, poor baby," she said with a pout and pulled me closer. I thought it was for cuddling, but she kissed me with her tongue. I didn't really resist. We were interrupted when Alexandra spread us apart. My turn. "Hey, Mr. Pinky," she said, taking Joanna's place, sucking on my tongue. This was interrupted when Peggy pulled me away and moved me to the living room couch. I didn't notice that she had already taken out a bottle of Spanish brandy and 4 glasses when I wasn't looking. The girls sat on either side of me. Peggy filled the glasses and handed 2 to each of the girls, then sat down on my lap, facing me. When she was settled, she took the glass from Joanna and handed it to me, and took the other glass from Alexandra for herself. "Salud," she said in a toast. We repeated the toast and clinked glasses. Peggy looked me straight in the eyes. "Surprise," she said with a smile. "You don't mind if they stay, do you?" I understood that sex with other people would not happen now that they were all so close, but I decided to be a good player. I frowned. "I don't know. It's high season. The prices are very high. Can they pay?" They all smiled at each other and started giggling. "Perhaps we can come up with something," Alexandra said, winking playfully. My brain shut down at the thought, but my sexual fantasies kicked into high gear. "He seems to approve, girls," she announced, moving from above. "Are you serious?" I asked Peggy. "Maybe." I drained my glass of brandy. "Damn," I said. "Now it's a medical school and Somalia." "What are you talking about?" asked Peggy. I looked at her, and then at each of the girls in turn, and again at Peggy. "Unless I'm really crazy, I thought I heard the possibility that you were suggesting I have fun with these girls. Is this a problem?" "Hell yes. In London, I decided that the only way I could be worthy of any of them was to go to medical school and then spend 20 years dooming Somali orphans. Now you're talking about 2. That's even more time in Somalia." Joanna and Alexandra both laughed at my statement while Peggy sat on my lap. "And what did you have to do to be worthy of me?" she asked. "Buy you a cup of coffee at some cheap bistro," I said as she began to spank my shoulders. I had to pull her towards me to make her stop, while Joanna and Alexandra laughed even harder. "Idiot, okay? Now I don't feel bad telling you this," Peggy said with fire in her eyes. "They are here for me, not for you." This took me by surprise. "Say it again." Peggy was already as red as a fire hydrant on her face, neck, and shoulders. "They are here for me," she whispered. "Oh damn, I turned you into a gay girl. One woman left me for a black guy. And women. And now we end with you leaving me for 2 women. What a track record I have." I closed my eyes and covered my face with my hands as I said this. Peggy grabbed them and started hissing, obviously worried that she had hurt me. I opened my eyes and smiled. When she realized that I was teasing her, she started moving again to hit me, but I continued to hold her wrists. "Just tell me what's going on, please," I said. Peggy relaxed and looked at me, her face completely open and vulnerable. I always wanted to try. "The girls and I kept in touch from London. We talked when you were outside during the day. They told me they were in a relationship. I told them I was curious. And then we planned this week at the beach for me to try." Joanna pressed herself against my right side, began stroking my arm and breathing into my ear. Alexandra did the same on the other side. "The thing is, Esteban," Joanna said, "she wouldn't have agreed to this if you hadn't been there as her partner to watch her back. You make her feel safe." When it looked like I was going to object, Alexandra continued the erotic whisper into the other ear. "We told Peggy that there's no point in you just watching. I thought you preferred girls. We," Joanna announced, "are just excited. And we don't have time to meet because we constantly work in a hotel to save money." This answer raised a question in my mind. "Then how did you allow yourself to do this?" "I'm crying," Peggy said proudly. "I saved a lot of money traveling with you, and they have cheap flights here on budget airlines. I refrained from saying that they were having cheap lesbian sex. I'm not a complete idiot." Instead, I said, "So, in a nutshell, you're willing to sleep with me out of pity while all 3 of you spend the rest of the week having almost constant, unconventional sex. Is that so?" "Yes," Peggy said, and Joanna and Alexandra nodded. It took me about a second to answer. "I can live with this." And that's what we did. Not right away. It's all about intimate touch, a slow, erotic courtship dance that builds tension and then releases it sexually. First, we had to go out to eat, then drink, all with close interaction, talking and touching. The girls touched each other, not me. It was all exciting, but where was the result? Then we returned to the apartment, and they wanted to take a quick shower. Not together. For now. More touching and lots of light kisses followed. Perhaps my expression was radiating "let's fucking get to it." Because Joanna moved away to give me some very competent pleasure, while Alexandra finally started fondling Peggy. After that, the next few days were spent in relaxed mornings, trips to the beach from late morning until lunchtime. They wore incredibly small bikinis and stayed close to each other. I swam and usually sneaked out to meet them for a late lunch. Then they returned to the apartment to clean up, have sex, and then take a short nap. I gave them space. I realized that Peggy was so focused on her sexual exploration that we hadn't run in the morning since we were in Barcelona. That doesn't mean they didn't care about me. They cared. I had my first threesome. I had numerous sessions with each of them separately, most often while observing the other two. But I was more like the fourth wheel on a tricycle or the odd dinner guest that the hostess or her friends have to talk to from time to prevent him from doing something awkward. Peggy clearly no longer needed me to watch her back. At some point, I realized I was bored. Don't get me wrong. The sex was good, even great, but Peggy was right. I needed emotional attachment for sex to really ring my bell. Peggy clearly threw herself into this adventure, body and soul, and I was happy for her. And Joanna and Alexandra were pleasant sex buddies for me, but nothing more. On the plus side, I was no longer worried about having to go to medical school and go to Somalia to treat orphans for worms. On the negative side, I became a little distant and was trying to figure out how to leave a few days early and maybe find Veronica even though I was still married. She occupied my thoughts more and more often. With these thoughts, I sat in a small cafe near the beach late afternoon. The girls have gone somewhere. I was just thinking about how I could leave and was working on several options when I heard a woman's voice. "Excuse me, sir, is this seat taken?" I looked up in surprise at the familiar voice and saw Veronica standing in front of me in a wide straw hat and large sunglasses, which she lowered to the tip of her nose to look over them at me. She wore a light dress that showed the silhouette of her body, and her smile was dazzling. A million witty comments fought in my head to come out first, but none succeeded. Instead, I stood up, walked closer to her, and looked into her eyes. She took off her glasses, and looking at me expectantly, we kissed. Sitting down, I asked, "How did you find me?" Then, after thinking a little, I felt doubt. "You were looking for me, weren't you?" She rolled her eyes. "Of course, I was looking. Why do you think I'm here? And I found you because Peggy told me you were here. She used Find My Phone. That explained how she found me. Peggy and I synced our phones early on so we could keep track of each other and avoid getting lost or kidnapped and tortured in some Slovakian violent movie hotel. But one more question remained. Why are you here?" Veronica took my hand. "Peggy called me a couple of times starting a few weeks ago. She was worried about what would happen to you when she went to school. She invited me to come before the start of the school year. I was supposed to come over tomorrow, but she called me the other day and said we had to hurry because you didn't seem to be having much fun." She was silent for a moment and then continued. "I must say that I never thought that I would hear or say something like that." "Me too." "This is true." I shrugged. "Yes." "Why?" "That was a good question. The sex is good, but there's nothing more to it. At least for me. Peggy seems to be having a lot of fun, and I'm happy for her. And for me, it's important to be with someone I really like, just like you. I thought I might be risking being so outspoken, especially if she wanted to go more slowly. But who was I kidding? She came to see me because I was bored. Maybe I'm just walking too slowly. "You must always tell me such lies," she said. "I'm not lying," I said with a smile. "You want me to believe that you would rather be with me than with 3 girls who want to sleep with you?" she asked with a grin. "Yes, that's exactly what I want to hear from you. Tell me more lies." "Fine. The game has begun. Do you want to know which part of your body I like best?" "Yes." Your smiling face. She looked at me for a moment. "You succeeded in this." "And I'm not lying," I said, showing her my phone. "I was trying to find the earliest train to Madrid. I have your contact information open so I can find a hotel or Airbnb nearby." She took my phone and looked. Is your face really my favorite part of your body? Yes, there are many other great parts, though. She pretended to frown. I thought you were a gentleman, but I think Peggy was right. Right about what? She said the beach would be a good place for us to meet, because then I could wear a tiny bikini to make sure you were really interested. She pursed her lips and waited for my answer. How tiny is the bikini? She leaned forward, looking me straight in the eyes. Almost naked. It sounded very promising. But I answered, being a gentleman is overrated, and Peggy seems to really understand me. I think I'd like to see you in that tiny bikini you're talking about. I would be happy to show you. We leaned towards each other to kiss, but heard a voice from the side. Get away from my man, bitch. Peggy threw herself into my lap and hugged me, breaking the kiss. Joanna and Alexandra sat down, smiling. Veronica said, he's mine now. Do you remember? Do you want it? You need to make a change, Peggy said, raising her hand. Veronica looked puzzled, and then Peggy explained. Like in Lucha Libre, you know? Veronica smiled, understanding the reference. She leaned over and looked at me. Do you want me to do this? I smiled, then frowned. Perhaps that would be normal, but I'm still not free. It's okay, Esteban, Peggy said. She lowers her standards of service to me. Your bad mood ruins my sex fun, and I told her that high standards are not worth wasting on you. Veronica shrugged. Perhaps I'm not lowering them so much, she said, slapping the palm of Peggy, who immediately stood up, kissed me on the cheek, and took a seat at the table. Veronica sat on my lap. She had to leave when the coffee and snacks arrived, but other than that, Veronica wouldn't let me go while we wandered around town. We went back to the apartment for a drink before dinner, and I noticed that Peggy's behavior with Joanna and Alexandra had changed. Everything was very relaxed. She seemed to be completing her sexual experiments as Joanna and Alexandra spent more time with each other. Peggy just looked at me and Veronica with a big smile on her face. That evening, Peggy made sure that Veronica and I were together in one of the spare bedrooms. She was finally fulfilling her responsibilities as a partner. Veronica looked at me after Peggy left the room. Do you mind being with one girl instead of three? I'm greedy. I don't like to share. Me too. That night, we decided that the best way to get to know each other quickly was for Veronica to try on her obscenely tiny bikini for me. This turned out to be an absolute affront to public morals. I would never agree to her wearing it in public. She didn't argue, but instead asked me to close her eyes while she changed into a more modest swimsuit, to which I reluctantly agreed. She seemed to like that I had become so possessive of her. As she sat on my lap in her more permissible swimsuit, we decided to take turns kissing and tasting every square inch of each other's bare skin. When we exhausted all open areas, we began to open new ones. I will admit that some areas have received more attention than others. After the second pass, Veronica ran her fingers through my chest hair. When do you think you will get divorced? Hearing at the end of November, according to my lawyer. I don't even have to be there. I should be a free man sometime after this, unless she does something crazy. Fine. Once you receive this document, you can meet my parents. I said nothing, and she rose to her elbow to look at me. You plan to stay, don't you? I don't know what I'm going to do, I admitted. I need to find a job somewhere. If you wanted to stay, I'm sure we could work something out, she said. But I need to know if you're staying because of me or because Peggy will be here too. There was a serious and unexpected expression on her face. Why should you worry about Peggy? You told me yourself that she has a nice ass. You also told her that she could sleep with me, and she was the one who invited you here. She pursed her lips. I did it because when I saw you together, I realized that this would happen anyway. And I knew that I couldn't be there to stop it. I just want to know what you will do now. Peggy is an amazing friend, I said, then began to whisper, but there's another girl I like. Is it true? And what is she like? I pulled her towards me, her legs wrapped around my hips. She is a passionate Latina beauty with a beautiful smile. I left a perfectly good threesome of women for her. Maybe I could introduce you to each other. We kissed. I don't think I'll like her. Besides, I asked, how do I know you won't want to try something different with these girls? She wrinkled her nose. I'm not interested in this. Fine. Seeing you having sex with all of them would make my mind explode. It so happened that I found myself on a sunny Mediterranean beach with 4 beautiful women, 3 of whom were almost naked and 1 less so, when I heard a voice. Steve? When I turned around, all 4 girls exclaimed in unison. Not Steve, but Esteban, and fell on the beach towels, laughing. They had been drinking sangria for some time. The woman who called me turned out to be my former boss's wife. He walked right behind her. In their honor, they both tried to act as if they didn't notice that I didn't seem depressed or that I seemed to have a female fan club. While his wife sat down on a chair under the beach umbrella and started talking to the girls, I stood up to talk to my old boss, Fred. I was a little angry when you quit on such short notice, but after it all blew up, I understood why. Sorry, there were a lot of things I could have done better back then. A wide smile appeared on his face. Is it true that you filled the house with homeless people? I don't know what you're talking about. He shook his head and laughed silently. Then he thought about it. He looked at me, biting his lips. Then he said, you know, the company has an office in Madrid. He looked at me expectantly. When I didn't answer, he continued, we really appreciated you and are sorry that you left. I decided to make him work hard. After all, I had a female fan club of 4 girls. Why should I go anywhere else? What I'm saying is that if you suddenly want to stay here for some reason, and he pointed to the girls, then we could probably get you a job in Madrid. This apology was enough, I thought. This sounds like a great opportunity, but my Spanish is terrible, and I don't have a work visa. I don't see how I could cope. Fred then explained that part of the reason he came to Spain, apart from the holiday, was that he needed to sort out some personnel problems in the Madrid office. As a result, the company needed someone who could act as a liaison with the American offices. They could pay for language training and apply for a visa. I'm interested in talking to the Madrid office about this. I looked at Veronica. At first, she didn't notice that I was looking at her, but then she felt it. She answered me with a smile. I looked back at Fred. He followed my gaze and met me again with a smile. There are worse reasons for doing something, Fred said. I laughed. Indeed, there is. Yes, Fred, I would be happy to talk with representatives of the Madrid office. I'll call them and tell them to expect your call. I'll email you the number. He looked at Veronica again and then at me. I'm sorry about what happened to Lori, but it looks like you're back on your feet. I hope everything works out. Looks like you have plenty of options for every occasion. We shook hands and Fred and his wife left to continue their walk. I returned and sat under the umbrella. Looks like I might be in Spain a little longer with a new job at my old company. What a Dickensian accident, Peggy exclaimed. I shrugged. I'd call it dumb luck. Veronica hugged me tightly. Peggy then asked her permission to hug me too, and when she received it, she did so. Joanna asked, what do you do? My old job was about leveraging synergies to create added value by helping companies manage disruptive change. She frowned. I don't understand, but what will you do now? I think it's the same thing, only in Spanish. I turned to Veronica. You'll help me learn the language, won't you, Ronnie? This was the first time I used this nickname for her. She seemed to like it and nodded. Fine. I want to learn all the swear words first. At this moment, Ronnie said a few words in Spanish in response. I guess they weren't the kind of person who liked polite conversation, so she did what I asked, but said them too quickly for me to remember. Peggy just laughed. Fast forward a few weeks to September. Peggy settled into an apartment with a very pretty Ukrainian girl, started her studies, and enjoyed life. We still met up for food or drinks with Ronnie. The two of them were like inseparable friends, and Olga, a Ukrainian, also often joined us, and it was a lot of fun to be with her. The divorce was finalized in December, just before Christmas. I finally met Ronnie's family, who turned out to be wonderful people. After receiving family approval, Ronnie and I began to take each other more seriously. As the semester progressed, Peggy and I would sometimes go out alone when Ronnie was busy studying, but Peggy and I never slept together again. In fact, we fell asleep together several times, but never slept in that sense. Those few occasions have happened when we got too drunk, and then broke into the nearest apartment together and collapsed on the bed, always fully clothed. I always honestly admitted these incidents to Ronnie, who only shook her head and laughed. She had already decided, probably back in Olivia, that Peggy was no longer a threat. I never got to be Peggy's winged partner. She easily found boyfriends, just as I predicted. My role, however, was to evaluate these guys. She didn't date anyone more than once or twice, unless I gave my approval. As a result, she had many short affairs, but none of them were serious. She was having too much of a good time for me to feel bad for her. The following June, Peggy returned to the States, and Ronnie was already living in my apartment. 3 years after we first met, when she received her medical degree, we married in Miami in a civil ceremony at City Hall. Paperwork in Madrid turned out to be too difficult. Peggy flew in and insisted on being a witness. My parents and sister also came. Over the course of the few days we spent together, it became clear that my family really liked Peggy, but they absolutely adored Ronnie. "You've earned 500 points, little brother," my sister told me after drinking too much champagne. "It's good for baseball, but it's not so good for marriages." Not. This girl is a godsend. Now, about 2 years after that, Peggy was getting married herself, and Ronnie and I flew in from Madrid. Coincidentally, the groom, who was Peggy's cheating boyfriend's ex-best friend from college, lived in my old hometown. As Peggy's winged partner, my job was to make sure that no one stood up when asked if anyone knew the reasons why the marriage should not take place. I told her I wasn't sure I could do it because anyone who did it might have a really good story to tell. To this, Ronnie just shook her head and told Peggy that I would be happy to support her in any case. Returning to the cafe, Peggy brought Ronnie up to date. Malibu Barbie just told us that she has twins, a son and a daughter who are 4.5 years old. "Is it true? Congratulations," Ronnie said to Lori and extended her hand. Lori was surprised, but reluctantly shook it. Ronnie turned to me. "What a pity. They're too young to be babysitters," she said, patting her belly and shrugging. She turned to Lori again. "I'm Veronica, Steve's wife," she announced, pointing to her rights to the territory. Yes, Ronnie never started calling me Esteban after Oliva. To her, I was Steve, or Steven when she was angry, which was rare. When I tried to object, she would just look at me and say, "Don't be stupid," and that would be the end of it. And for Ronnie, Peggy became Margarita after Oliva. Peggy liked it and adopted it as a new version of her name. Only I was allowed to call her Peggy when we were in a small circle. Ronnie continued talking to Lori. "I've heard so much about you." She smiled as she said this, without the slightest hint of malice. The girl had manners. Peggy's not doing so well. She looked like she wanted to say something sharply to Lori, but first she looked at me and Ronnie, read our moods, and decided to remain silent. Lori looked depressed. Peggy looked at her watch and suddenly stood up. "I'm late. I need to run." "I'll see you tomorrow at the rehearsal dinner," she said, waving as she left the cafe without even looking at Lori. After a moment, Lori looked up. "Congratulations. I didn't know you got married, Steve." She finished her drink. "None of your friends or family communicate with me, and you have disappeared from social networks. I thought you were still in Norway, but it seems you never went." She fiddled with the napkin on the table in front of her. "So, just so you know, I always knew that we would get divorced. I may be blonde, but I'm not that stupid," she said, looking at me again. "I talked to a lawyer. He told me that there was no way to stop it, and that since you weren't asking for anything other than the money you'd already taken, there was no point in fighting, even because of what you did to the house. I just tore up all these papers because I knew I had made mistakes, and I could never figure out how to correct them. I guess I was just hoping that you would understand that I don't want a divorce and talk to me again." I was angry, scared, and confused. I was even more scared when I found out I was pregnant. Then I realized that I need you. but I knew that you would never come back. I guess I thought I could use the kids to get you to talk to me again until you realized they weren't yours. I guess I thought it would give me a chance to at least see you again. I missed you, and the guys I dated after you were all only interested in my body, or my money, or the fact that I'm on television. None of them were interested in me as a person. Not like you used to be. There were tears in her eyes as she stood up. Good luck with the baby, she told Ronnie and hurried away. Ronnie and I sat in silence for a few moments. She really has a good body, Ronnie said. I said nothing, but that didn't stop her. How do you think it compares to mine? I squeezed her tightly, holding her hands under her round belly. Your body excited me so much that I put my child inside you. And always remember that I left 3 beautiful girls for you. And I promise that I will never, ever let you wear that olive bikini in public. Ronnie relaxed and smiled. She was silent for a moment. 30 euros, she finally said. I enjoyed holding her and kissing her neck and didn't listen much. HM, you owe me 30 euros. Pay up. How did you calculate that, my love? I asked. Ronnie counted on her fingers. She came to meet you today when you said she was unlikely to come. She didn't know you were married. She really thought you went to Norway. She really knew that you would get divorced no matter what she did. She wanted you to think the children were yours, and she wanted to come back to you. I guessed 6, 5 euros each. Only 30 euros. 25 euros. Lloyd is the father, not Deshawn. I am entitled to a 5 euro loan. She turned around on my lap to look at me. Is it true? That fat operator? I thought you were joking. Yes, but I also turned out to be right. 1 point for me. Wow, he's terrible. Is she really as your sister says? Oh yes, stupid as a bag of hammers. Okay, you can pay me later. Now buy me some fries. Your baby makes me want to eat. She stroked her belly as she told him. Wait there a little. I did as my sweetheart said and waved to the waiter to order fries. At this point, I learned that Lori had not paid for her $20 drink, even though she was still making much more than me. At that moment, I realized that I did not regret at all that I invited homeless people to live in our house many years ago. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.